can feel it. I know it. We're staying.
A man named Daniel arrives at a foster home and sees the kids playing outside. Their caregiver, Miss Sally, then sees Daniel and goes inside to meet him. After they greet each other, Daniel says he bought some things for the kids, and Sally appreciates him for this. She then asks if he'll stay for a while, but Daniel says he has a playoff game he's supposed to attend. Shortly after, Daniel mentions that he just saw some new kids in the playground, and Sally says she actually just accepted 3 kids from other foster homes. As she talks about how it's always hard for the kids to adapt, she shows Daniel a boy named Billy who has barely said anything since he arrived. She also tells him about a girl named Allie who is insecure about herself. Sally adds that when Allie arrived, she asked if God could make people by accident, and the question just melted her heart. Daniel also feels pity for Ali, and Sally then introduces him to a boy named Huko who has been causing trouble since he arrived because he likes bullying the other kids. As she sees Huko arguing with one of the other kids, Sally tells Daniel to wait for her while she goes to speak to him.
It's never easy for them to adjust.
After she heads outside, Daniel follows her and stands by the door. A girl named Lisa then comes over to meet Daniel to ask if he's there to tell them a story. Daniel looks confused by this, but Lisa mentions that she and the other kids always hear a story on Tuesdays. Before Daniel can say anything, Sally hears what Lisa said and mentions that the person who usually tells them stories won't be around till next week. Lisa still asks Daniel if he'll tell them a story, but he says he's not sure his story will be as good as the ones they've been hearing. Lisa doesn't seem to care, and she calls the other kids to come into the house so that Daniel can tell them a story. Daniel is shocked by this, but as Sally asks if he has some free time to spare, he says he does. He, however, mentions that he doesn't have a story to tell the kids.
Okay, I've got a story.
Just then, he enters the living room and meets the kids waiting for him. After staring at Billy and Ali for a while, Daniel sees Huko's necklace and tells the kids that he has a story for them. He then mentions that the title of his story is The Lost Medallion and that it has 3 special kids in it. As the kids pay attention to him, Daniel says that the names of the 3 special kids in the story are Billy, Ali, and Prince Huko. Huko looks confused and wonders why Daniel is using the names of the kids at the foster home. He also talks about Billy and how he barely talks to anyone, probably because he's not very smart. Daniel doesn't like his tone, and he tells Huko that he knows many people who are quiet and clever. He also mentions that there are people who talk a lot but are not smart. One of the kids says that Huko is like that, but he doesn't seem happy to hear this. Daniel then begins his story and talks about a kind-hearted king who melted his crown to turn it into a medallion to prove to his people that they were all important.
Isn't that like a big piece of fruit?
This humble act made the medallion capable of granting wishes, and the king used it to grow the crops on his island, while also protecting his people from storms and wars. Everything kept going on well for the king, until his prideful son, Huko, took the medallion and lost the magical stone attached to it. Unfortunately, this makes the medallion lose its power, and with no one to save the king's people anymore, an evil warlord named Cobra attacks them. Before Cobra can find the medallion, the king runs away into the woods to hide it. Cobra immediately runs after him, but the king eventually wraps the medallion in a special piece of cloth and buries it in the ground. As he's then about to leave the woods, Cobra catches him and asks for the medallion. The king refuses to say anything about it, and Cobra kills him.
Where is it?
Many years later, the medallion remains hidden despite the attempts of archaeologists to find it. One day, a clever boy named Billy sneaks into his dad's archaeological site to see what he can find. While he's trying to dig a part of the site, his dad, Michael, sees him and tells him to leave. Billy believes he can be useful on the site, but Michael insists that his help is not needed. After he leaves, Billy sees 2 men standing outside the gate. As he stares at them, one of them tells Billy that his team could use choose an archaeologist like him. He adds that his boss, Mr. Cobb, will also appreciate Billy's efforts, unlike his dad, who doesn't even want him around. Billy doesn't respond to this, but as he sees the men putting up a foreclosure notice outside the site, he looks shocked and tries to tear it. The men then stop him and tell him to leave the area. Following this, they enter their car and ask Mr. Cobb what he thinks they should do next. Mr. Cobb then mentions that his family has been looking for the medallion for years and that he believes Billy is on to something. As he tells his men to track Billy, they instantly agree to do it.
Yeah, I promise.
Shortly after, Billy meets up with his friend, Allie, who talks about something she just read in a book. She tells Billy that he needs to start reading different books because he might find something useful there, but he says that what he's looking for isn't inside a book. Allie then asks if his dad sent him out of the site again, and Billy says he did. Allie then asks if he has found anything interesting yet, but Billy says he hasn't. He, however, says he knows he'll find the medallion one day and use it to make the world a better place. As he then walks away with Allie, it turns out that Cobb's men have been watching them. Shortly after, Billy drops Allie off at the orphanage where she lives. Before she heads inside, she gives him an old journal she recently found about their island. Billy doesn't really seem interested in reading the book, but Allie says he might find something useful inside it. Following this, Billy takes the book and heads home.
See you tomorrow.
When he gets there, Billy sees Michael looking sad in front of the house. As he then asks what's wrong, Michael says that Cobb has shut down the site because he can't pay up his loan. As Michael adds that he has given up on his project, Billy says he can't do that because his late mom would have wanted them to continue looking for the medallion. Michael says he has lost everything because of a non-existent medallion, but Billy says he's sure it exists. Michael still doesn't listen to Billy, and he says that everything that has ever meant anything to him is all buried in the ground. Billy looks disappointed as he hears this, and he just heads to his room. After a while, as Billy thinks of how he can find the medallion, he sees a stone his mom gave him before she died. It then turns out that while his mom was on her sick bed, she gave him the stone and told him that it has been in her family for a long time. She adds that even though it might not seem like much, there's actually something special about it. Later that night, Cobb's men stay outside Billy's house to see if he'll come up with something.
Hey, how's school today?
While Billy is still trying to figure out where the medallion could be, Allie sneaks into his room. She then tells Billy that she wants to run away from the orphanage to look for her mom. Billy looks sad to hear this, but he eventually makes her promise not to run away if he reads the journal she gave him earlier. Allie then agrees to stay on the island, and as Billy reads the journal, he gets tired because he doesn't think there's anything special in it. Allie still forces him to continue reading it, and after a while, they realize that the river on the island got moved to a different place after an earthquake that happened many years ago. Billy also figures out that his dad has been looking for the medallion on the wrong side of the island. As he and Allie decide to head out to check the part of the island where the medallion was likely buried, Cobb's men hear their conversation and decide to start their search too. Much later, Allie and Billy struggle to find the medallion despite using a metal detector to scan the ground. While they're at it,
And we'll read it together.
they suddenly hear Cobb's men leading a search for the medallion in the same area. Allie and Billy are shocked by this, and they quickly hide behind a tree to avoid being seen. As the men eventually walk away, Billy's metal detector keeps beeping on the spot where he dropped it. Even though he's not sure what he could find, Billy gently digs the ground and finds the medallion wrapped in a special piece of cloth. The kids are shocked by this, but as they talk about how Michael will react when he sees the medallion, Cobb's men show up behind them and ask for it. Allie and Billy refuse to give it up, and they quickly run away before they're caught. After losing the men, the kids head to Billy's house to show the medallion to Michael. Before they enter, Billy brings out the medallion from his pocket and says that his dad will be really surprised. Suddenly, something starts glowing in his pocket, and Allie calls his attention to it. As he checks what it is, he sees that it's the special stone his mom gave him. Surprisingly, the stone starts levitating and eventually enters the hole in the middle of the medallion. Billy looks shocked and realizes that the stone is truly special. Allie also looks amazed, and she tells Billy to put the medallion around his neck to surprise Michael. Billy does just this, but as he enters the house with Allie, they see that Cobb's men have captured Michael. Billy looks shocked by this, and as one of the men asks for the medallion, he refuses to give it up. Interestingly, Michael doesn't know that his son now has the medallion, and he tells the men to leave him alone because he's just a kid. Just then, Billy shows him the medallion, and Michael cannot believe that his son has already found it. The men ask for it again, but Billy says he won't give it up, as they then warn him that he'll regret not giving them the medallion. Billy says he just wishes the whole mess never happened.
No!
Almost immediately, the stone in the medallion glows, and Billy gets teleported away from the room with Allie. As they then find themselves in a different part of the island where people are moving around on the beach, Billy realizes that his wish was granted. Allie doesn't get this, and as she wonders where they are, Billy says it seems they went back in time. Allie tells him that they need to go back home before anything happens to them, but Billy believes that they're safe. Almost immediately, a strange boy appears behind them and tells them to come with him. Allie looks unhappy because she thinks they're in trouble, but Billy still seems quite calm. After a while, Allie and Billy are taken through the woods until they get to a nearby village. The villagers in the place keep staring at them, and Allie and Billy look scared. Shortly after, Prince Huko shows up and asks who they are. Billy introduces himself and Allie to Huko, but the prince just looks at them strangely.
Hi.
Suddenly, he sees the medallion with Billy and looks shocked. As the villagers also see it, one of them looks happy and mentions that the medallion has returned to their land with a new king. Billy looks confused, but Huko angrily reminds the villagers that he's the king. They don't seem to care about this, and one of them invites Billy to stay for dinner. Allie quickly tells Billy to wish them back to the future because she doesn't think the villagers can be trusted. However, Billy looks happy to have been called a king, and he agrees to stay for dinner. Later on, the villagers prepare a feast for Billy, and Huko gets jealous. After a while, one of Cobra's spies sees the villagers having a feast and realizes that someone has brought them the medallion. As the spy returns to Cobra's cave, he tells Cobra that the villagers now recognize a stranger as their new king because he has the medallion. Cobra sounds pissed and says he's their only king, but one of his men mentions that the villagers don't see him as their leader. Cobra doesn't like the sound of this, and he kills the man before throwing him into a pit of fire.
Prepare my outriggers.
Yes, my lord.
The next morning, Cobra and his men invade the village and start looking for the medallion. Interestingly, Billy, Allie, Huko, and another boy named Anui are nowhere to be found, and it turns out that they left the village earlier to check out a nearby waterfall. While they're there, Huko asks for the medallion because he's the real king, but Billy refuses to give it up. He also mentions that it's better the medallion stays with him so that it won't go missing. Huko doesn't appreciate this, and as the boys argue about it, Cobra shows up and grabs Allie. The boys are shocked by this, and Allie looks scared as she tells Billy that he should have taken them back home. Before Billy says anything, Cobra realizes that he's the new king the villagers talked about, and he says he wants the medallion. Billy refuses to give it up, but Cobra threatens to kill Allie if he doesn't get the medallion.
I will forgive you.
Billy looks scared for Allie, and he throws the medallion to Cobra, who then releases his friend. Before Cobra can hurt them, the kids jump off a cliff into a river. Cobra then holds the medallion and wishes death upon them. As he returns to the village, Cobra tells his men to take some of the villagers as slaves. He also tells his trackers to find the dead bodies of Billy and the other kids. After a while, Allie wakes up on the shore and realizes that she and the others are still alive. As she looks happy about this, Billy mentions that they need to get the medallion back. Huko suggests going to Cobra's island to take it back, but Billy doesn't believe they're capable of doing it alone. Billy then suggests looking for an old wise man named Faleaka, but Huko says that no one has seen him since his father's death. Billy still believes they can find Faleaka, and he tells them to follow him.
Jump!
Shortly after, they find Faleaka's house, and he invites them inside. Before Billy can explain why they're really there, Faleaka says he already knows that they want him to help them get back the medallion. Billy and the others are shocked by this, but Faleaka sounds angry and tells them to leave. Huko believes Faleaka can't help them, but Billy still tries to convince the wise man to change his mind. As Faleaka doesn't respond, Billy looks pissed and says that they'll get the medallion without his help. Faleaka seems impressed by this, and he tells Billy that he admires his courage. He then agrees to help them, and the kids look happy. After a while, Faleaka takes them outside and shows them a pineapple, which he says will help them defeat Cobra. He then gives them different tasks to complete using the pineapple. As he tells Huko to share the pieces of his pineapple with his friends, the prince says that Billy and the others are not his friends. He adds that he can't serve anyone because he's a king. Faleaka looks disappointed as he hears this, and he tells Huko that a wise man once told him that a true great king will always find the courage to serve others. Huko sounds pissed and asks what kind of person said that, and Faleaka says it was his father. Huko looks surprised by this, and as he says nothing else, Faleaka senses that Cobra's men are getting close to them. Billy then comes up with an idea that helps them reach another part of the island before they're caught by the soldiers. Elsewhere, Cobra tries to use the medallion to destroy Huko's island, but nothing happens. As he gets pissed, he calls his advisor and asks why the medallion isn't working for him. His advisor looks scared of telling him the truth, but as Cobra tells him to say it, regardless of how it might sound, he mentions that the medallion only works on a kind heart. Cobra sounds pissed as he hears this, because his advisor is indirectly saying that he doesn't have a kind heart. Before his advisor can say anything else,
I don't believe you.
Cobra kills him and tells his men to bring him a new advisor. Elsewhere, Faleaka and the kids see some of Cobra's men resting on the beach while their boats are near the water. Since they'll need a boat to get to Cobra's island, Billy sneaks up on them and damages 2 of the boats while he leaves the last one. After a while, he and the others then enter the boat to head to Cobra's island. The soldiers see them and immediately try to chase them, but their boats sink in the water. Much later, Billy and the others get to Cobra's island and start walking toward his cave. As Ali sees that Faleaka is tired, she stops with him so he can rest. Faleaka thanks her for this, and he then asks about her family. Ali says she has never really had one because her mom always called her an accident before she sent her to the orphanage. Faleaka feels sorry for her, and he tells her that even though her mom might think she's an accident, she can never be one to God because he created her for a purpose. Ali gets emotional as she hears this, but she doesn't say anything.
Yes!
Meanwhile, Billy and the other boys get captured by Cobra's men, and as Ali and Faleaka realize that they're missing, they look shocked. Ali also seems quite worried, but Faleaka says he's sure they can save Billy, Huko, and Anui. Following this, they move around the island and eventually see Billy and the others inside a cage. Faleaka then asks Ali what she thinks they should do, and she comes up with a good plan that helps defeat the men and rescue her friends. As they then continue their journey, Faleaka tells Billy that even though they've only been together for a while, he can see his strengths. Billy says his dad never saw them, but Faleaka mentions that Michael was probably too preoccupied to tell him. Billy then says he thought he would find meaning when he found the medallion, but Faleaka says he must understand that sometimes the things he is seeking are already inside him. Suddenly, one of Cobra's men sees them and shoots an arrow at Billy, but Faleaka stands in its way. Billy immediately knocks down the soldier before turning to Faleaka to ask why he gave up his life for him. Faleaka says it's because a great king also died for him in the past. Following this, Faleaka dies, and the kids look sad. Back at the foster home, Daniel tells the kids that Faleaka demonstrated the greatest kind of love by giving up his life for someone else. One of the kids says he can't do that, and Daniel mentions that not everyone can do it. Interestingly, Billy and Ali appear to be more comfortable as they hear Daniel's story, and they move closer to the other kids to continue listening to Daniel. Sally looks happy about this, and she also notices that Huko is now calmer. Just then, Ali asks if the kids buried Faleaka, and Daniel says they did. He then continues his story and mentions that after the kids buried Faleaka, Billy came up with a plan and told the others that they had to leave immediately to find Cobra's cave.
Did they bury him?
As they get closer to the cave, Cobra tells his soldiers that they'll be taking down Huko's island the next day. They all sound excited about this, and Cobra tells them to enjoy the feast he already planned for them that night. After a while, they fall asleep, and Billy and the others sneak into the cave. Billy then realizes that he can steal the medallion from Cobra while he's sleeping. Just as he grabs it, though, Cobra wakes up and tells his guards to catch Billy. With nowhere to run to, Billy tells his friends to escape, but as they leave, they set off a trap that prevents them from going anywhere. After Cobra's guards catch Billy, he looks pissed that a small boy is really challenging him. He then punches Billy to knock him out. Shortly after, Cobra's new advisor tells him that he needs to be friends with Billy, but Cobra doesn't understand this. His advisor then mentions that with Billy's help, Cobra will be able to control the medallion and share its power. Following this, Cobra goes to Billy's cell and calls him a friend. Billy says he can't have Cobra as a friend because he already has friends. Cobra then tells him that his friends are dead, and Billy looks sad. After a while, Cobra invites Billy to join him for dinner. Billy doesn't get why he's suddenly being nice, but Cobra explains that he needs Billy to control the medallion so they can use it together. Later that night, while Billy is sleeping inside his cell, Faleaka appears to him in a dream. Billy says sorry for not getting back the medallion, but Faleaka says that what really matters is his heart. Just then, Cobra comes over to meet Billy to ask if he's ready for them to work together. Billy rejects his offer, and Cobra looks pissed and threatens to kill him. He adds that Billy's friends are not dead yet, but he'll kill them soon. Billy is shocked by this, and he looks worried for his friends. It then turns out that Cobra actually sent Huko, Ali, and Ennui to a dungeon where they've been working with some other slaves.
As were you.
A while later, Billy grows tired of sitting in his cell, so he picks the lock and escapes. He then finds the dungeon and sees his friends. Ali looks happy to see him, and Billy says he's glad that she and the others are alive. Billy then tells her that he thinks the solution to defeating Cobra is in their hearts. Ali doesn't get this, but Billy mentions that they have to use the things Faleaka taught them during their tasks to defeat Cobra. Following this, Ali tells Ennui and Huko about the plan, and they start teaching the slaves in the dungeon what they have to do. Shortly after, the guards enter the dungeon to bring out Ali, Ennui, and Huko. The three of them are then taken to meet Cobra, who tells his men that it's time to kill their enemies. Almost immediately, Billy sneaks into the hall and sees that Cobra has gotten Huko tied up. Elsewhere, the guards in the dungeon have all fallen asleep after drinking a potion Ennui gave them. With this, the slaves escape and invade the hall, after which they set off a series of explosives. Cobra is shocked by this, but Billy quickly saves Huko. As Billy tries to escape, Cobra runs after him, but the medallion falls from where he kept it. Before he's able to retrieve it, he notices that the stone is missing. He then sees Billy running away with it, but since he can't stop him, he grabs Ali. Just as Billy is about to find his way out, Cobra shows up behind him and threatens to kill Ali if he doesn't get the stone. Billy refuses to drop it, and he provokes Cobra to fight with him. During their fight, Cobra mistakenly stabs himself with his poisonous fingernail. As Billy then tries to get back the medallion, Cobra slips into his pit of fire. Billy quickly grabs the medallion so that Cobra won't take it down into the pit, but he eventually loses his grip, and the evil warlord falls to his death. The medallion also falls into the pit of fire, but Billy looks happy that he and his friends are alive. Shortly after, the villagers on the island organize a feast to celebrate Cobra's death. The next day, Allie tells Billy that they're stuck on the island for good, and he looks sad about this. As Billy thinks about what to do, he realizes that since they brought the medallion from the future, another version of it must still be buried in the time they're currently stuck in. Almost immediately, he suggests going to dig up the place where they found the medallion in the future. As they find the medallion there, the kids look really happy. The special stone then returns to the medallion and Billy hands it over to Huko. Following this, Huko thanks Billy and Allie for saving the island. As Billy then tells Allie that it's time to save his dad, Huko uses the medallion to send them back to where they belong. When they get there, Billy attacks the thugs in the living room, but Michael eventually stops him. It then turns out that since Billy saved the island many years ago, the world has now changed, and Cobb's men are no longer evil. Billy seems impressed by this, and he tells Michael that he knows where to find the medallion. Shortly after, Billy takes Michael to the woods to dig up the medallion. Michael looks pleased about this, and even though finding the medallion means he has achieved his goal, he hugs his son and realizes that Billy is the greatest treasure he could ever have. As Daniel concludes the story, he mentions that Huko discovered that greatness comes from loving and serving others. Huko looks remorseful as he hears this, and he decides to stop bullying the other kids. Daniel also says that Allie realized that no one is an accident to God, and that he always has an incredible purpose for everyone. Allie looks happy as she hears this, and she appears to feel more confident about herself. Almost immediately, Daniel turns to Billy and tells him that his greatest value comes from God, and that the most important thing he should do is to trust his creator. Billy then says that his heart is his medallion, and Daniel calls him a smart boy.
And Billy.
He also tells the other kids that God loves them more than they can ever imagine. Shortly after, the kids return to the playground, and Sally thanks Daniel for telling the kids a good story. As he then looks at them, he tells Sally never to give up on them. Sally says she never gave up on Daniel when he was at the foster home, and that she would never do that to the kids. Daniel then heads toward the door, but before he leaves, he thanks her for loving him during his time at the foster home, and Sally says it's what she does. Even though Billy, Allie, and Huko all had different things they were dealing with as new arrivals at Sally's foster home, Daniel made them feel better by telling them a wonderful story. They also learned that true worth isn't found in the approval of others, and that everyone has a special purpose in life, no matter what they've been through.